I
I want
never
the property
imagined I
now.
would see
You
my
can't
own
just keep it all
daughter
to
so
yourself. It's not
furious,
fair. I am
screaming
not
at me like a
giving you
maniac
anything.
because I
How dare
refused
you
to give her
ask
the
me for
money I
this?
earned from
Get out
selling
of
my
my
property. And
house!
even less did I
You
think
can't
my
do
oldest
this.
son would
My
defend
leg.
her with such
Stop it.
violence
You're
that he would
hurting
end
her.
up breaking one of my ribs with a single shove. But what neither of them knew was that in exactly 20 minutes they would bitterly regret being born when they discovered the truth I had been silently keeping. I'm glad to have you here. Follow my story until the end and comment the city you're watching from. My name is Sandra Mason. I am 64 years old, and all my life I have been a simple, hard-working woman, one of those who wakes up every day at 5:30 in the morning to prepare coffee and think about everything I have to do. I live in a modest little house on the outskirts of this small town with my small garden where I grow tomatoes and cilantro, and where every morning I greet my chickens before giving them their food. My routine has been the same for years. Black coffee without sugar, buttered toast, and then I sit on the porch to watch the sunrise while I plan my day. Some might call it boring, but I find peace in these simple moments before the world wakes up. It's during these quiet mornings that I feel closest to John. I have been a widow for 8 years. My husband, John Mason, died of a sudden heart attack, leaving me alone with a property we had inherited from his parents, but which was in very poor condition. It was a large property with nearly 20 acres, but it needed a lot of work and money to be productive again. That day is still carved into my memory. I was making John's favorite apple pie when I heard the thud from the barn. By the time I reached him, his eyes were already vacant, staring at the ceiling beams he had installed himself 30 years earlier. I remember how the paramedics tried to revive him for what seemed like hours, but deep down I already knew he was gone. The way his calloused hand had gone limp in mine told me everything I needed to know. "I'm sorry, Mrs. Mason," the young paramedic had said, his face showing genuine sorrow. "There was nothing we could do. Throughout all these years, while my children, Matthew and Emma, lived their lives in the city, I managed as best I could to stay afloat. I worked cleaning houses, selling turkey and mashed potato plates on the weekends, and even babysitting the neighbors' children to be able to pay my basic expenses. My hands, once smooth and delicate in my youth, had become weathered road maps of my struggle. The arthritis was starting to set in, making mornings painful, but I never complained. Not to anyone. I never asked my children for financial help because I knew they had their own responsibilities. And besides, I have always been a proud woman, one of those who prefers to solve her problems alone rather than be a burden to anyone. Matthew would call occasionally, usually around holidays or my birthday. Emma would visit maybe twice a year, her designer purse clashing with my worn-out furniture. They had their lives, and I had mine. That's how it had been for years. The farm had become a constant worry. The roofs leaked, the fences were broken, and the vegetation had grown so much that it looked like an abandoned jungle. Several neighbors had suggested I sell it, but I always refused because I felt I would be betraying John's memory. That land had been his family's dream for generations, and getting rid of it felt like tearing out a piece of my heart. John's father had purchased it after returning from World War II, determined to build something lasting for his family. John had grown up there, and we had raised our children there. Every tree, every fence post held memories. My neighbor Grace Johnson would often come over for evening tea. At 70, she was sharper than most people half her age, and she'd been my rock since John passed. "Sandra," she said one evening while we watched the sunset, "you're killing yourself trying to maintain this place. John wouldn't want that." "It's all I have left of him," I replied, feeling the familiar ache in my chest whenever I thought about letting go. Grace squeezed my hand. "John isn't in the land, honey. He's in your heart and your memories. Those go wherever you do." I didn't answer, but her words nested in my mind like birds finding a new home. But 6 months ago, everything changed. I received an unexpected visit from a very well-dressed man in a gray suit and a red tie who introduced himself as a representative of a construction company. "Mrs. Mason," he said, extending his hand. "I'm James Wilson from Horizon Development." My initial thought was that he was another one of those pushy salesmen trying to sell me something I neither needed nor could afford. I was already planning my polite rejection as I invited him to sit on my porch swing. I didn't want to be rude, but I had laundry waiting to be hung. "What can I do for you, Mr. Wilson?" I asked, offering him a glass of homemade iced tea. He took a small sip, nodding appreciatively. "Excellent tea, Mrs. Mason. I'll get right to the point. My company is interested in purchasing your property." I nearly laughed. This wasn't the first offer I'd received over the years, usually from locals wanting to expand their farms or from hunters interested in the wooded section. "I'm afraid the property isn't for sale," I said automatically, the words practiced from years of similar conversations. He explained that they were interested in buying my property to develop a housing project. "The location is perfect for our new community development. Easy access to the highway, yet rural enough to appeal to city folks wanting to escape the concrete jungle." I nodded politely, waiting for him to finish so I could firmly decline as I always did. "We're prepared to make a very generous offer," he continued, pulling out a folder from his leather briefcase. And when he mentioned the figure they were willing to pay, I almost fainted right there. $180,000. Never in my life had I heard such a large amount of money directed towards me. I must have looked shocked because Mr. Wilson chuckled softly. "I see the number caught your attention," he said. "It's a fair market value given the development potential." The man told me that the location of my property was perfect for building a modern residential area, and that they were willing to pay that price without haggling as long as I was willing to sign the papers in the coming weeks. I need time to think about it," I stammered, my mind racing with possibilities I had never allowed myself to consider before. "Of course," he said, leaving his card. "Take all the time you need. But just so you know, this offer has a deadline. We're looking at several properties in the area, but yours is our first choice." For days I couldn't sleep thinking about that offer. I would get up in the pre-dawn hours and walk around the farm, remembering all the happy moments I had lived there with John, but also thinking about all the possibilities that money could bring to my life. I could fix my little house, buy new clothes, travel to see my grandchildren who live far away, and above all, have the financial peace of mind I had never had in my 64 years of life. One night, around 3 a.m., I found myself standing in what used to be our bedroom, looking at a photograph of John and me on our 30th anniversary. His kind eyes seemed to look straight through me, seeing my struggle. "What should I do, John?" I whispered to the empty room. "This place was your dream." That night I dreamed of John. We were sitting on our favorite hill overlooking the property. The sun was setting, painting everything in gold. In my dream, he took my hand, his touch as real as if he were truly there. "Sandy," he said, using the nickname only he ever called me, "you've held on long enough. It's time to live for yourself now." I woke up with tears on my face and a certainty in my heart. It was time to let go. Finally, after much reflection and even dreaming of John asking me to be happy, I made the hardest decision of my life. I sold the farm. The paperwork was surprisingly fast, and in less than 1 month, I had an amount of money in my bank account that I never thought I would possess. Mr. Wilson was true to his word, making the process as smooth as possible. I signed the final papers in the office of a local lawyer, Mr. Peterson, who assured me everything was in order. As I handed over the deed that had been in John's family for generations, I felt a strange mix of grief and liberation, like setting down a heavy load I'd been carrying for too long. The first thing I did after receiving the money was remain in absolute silence. I didn't tell anyone, not even Grace, who had always been like a sister to me and who knew all my secrets. Something inside me told me I should keep this information private until I decided exactly what to do with such a fortune. I kept the sales documents in a metal box that I have under my bed, along with the few pieces of jewelry my mother had left me. It wasn't that I didn't trust Grace. She was the most trustworthy person I knew. But this decision felt intensely personal, something I needed to process on my own before sharing with anyone else. And perhaps, deep down, I was afraid of judgment. Would people think I had betrayed John's memory by selling the family land? For the first 2 weeks after the sale, my life continued exactly the same. I woke up at 5:30, made my coffee, fed my chickens, and continued my usual routine. The only difference was that now when I sat on the porch in the afternoons, a secret smile would appear on my face as I thought about all the wonderful things I could do with that money. I had started making a mental list of my priorities. First, I wanted to completely fix my little house, change the roof that leaked during the rains, paint the walls that were faded, install a new bathroom because mine was more than 20 years old, and buy a modern stove to replace the old one that sometimes didn't light well. My house wasn't much, but it was mine. John had built it with his own hands when we first married, adding rooms as our family grew. It was separate from the main farmland, a small half-acre plot with the house and my garden. The sale agreement had allowed me to keep it, which was a blessing. I also thought about buying a used truck, but in good condition, because I was tired of depending on the public bus to go to town. The old bus schedule meant I often spent hours waiting, regardless of weather. A reliable vehicle would give me freedom I hadn't had in years. But above all, there was something very special I wanted to do with that money. Something I had been secretly planning, and which I knew would change the lives of many people. However, it was not yet the time to reveal it. I didn't even dare to say it out loud to myself because I was afraid the emotion would betray me. This dream had been forming in my mind for years, but I never had the resources to make it happen. Now, with this unexpected windfall, it seemed possible. Each night, I would open my nightstand drawer and look at the bank statement, still not quite believing the numbers I saw there. For someone who had been counting pennies for years, the sum seemed almost mythical. My children had grown distant over the years, not out of malice, but from the natural drift that happens when lives move in different directions. Matthew, my firstborn, had always been ambitious, determined to escape the constraints of rural life. Matthew is 42 now, works as a restaurant manager in the city about 2 hours away. He had always been John's pride, with his quick mind and charisma. But somewhere along the way, the bright-eyed boy who used to follow his father around the farm had disappeared, replaced by a man with a perpetual crease between his brows and a shortness of temper that reminded me too much of my own father. His gambling habit started small, friendly poker games with coworkers, the occasional sports bet. But over the years, it had grown into something that seemed to control him rather than the other way around. The few times I'd visited his apartment, I'd noticed the collection notices poorly hidden beneath magazines. The drinking came later, a way to cope with the mounting debts, I supposed. He never discussed these problems with me directly, but a mother knows. The slight slur in his voice during our infrequent phone calls. The way he avoided any questions about his finances. Emma, my daughter, is 38, works in an office, and has always been more practical than her brother. Where Matthew dreamed, Emma calculated. She married Aaron Reynolds, a man with a smooth smile and ambitious eyes, right after college. They have 2 beautiful children, my grandchildren Lily and Jacob, who I rarely get to see. Emma and Aaron live in a house that seems too large for 4 people, with payments I suspect stretch their budget thin. Aaron works in real estate, a field where appearance matters as much as substance. His suits are always impeccable, his car always new, but I've noticed how Emma's smile tightens when he talks about their latest purchase. The last time they visited, about 7 months ago, I overheard them arguing in hushed tones on my back porch. "We can't keep spending like this," Emma had hissed. "The credit cards are maxed out." "Trust me," Aaron had replied, his voice smooth as silk. "I've got a big deal closing next month. It'll turn everything around." I hadn't meant to eavesdrop, but their voices had carried through the open kitchen window as I washed dishes. I never mentioned what I heard, but it troubled me deeply. After John died, the children had come for the funeral, of course. Matthew had stood stiff and uncomfortable in his dark suit, while Emma had taken charge of the arrangements with efficient grief. But once the casserole dishes had been returned to neighbors and the sympathy cards had stopped arriving, their visits became less frequent, their calls shorter. I understood in a way. They had their own lives, their own struggles, and I had never been one to demand attention or complain about being lonely. John and I had raised them to be independent, and they were. Perhaps too much so. The last Christmas we spent together had been 3 years ago. Matthew had arrived late, smelling of airport bars. Emma and Aaron had spent most of the day checking their phones. Only the grandchildren had seemed truly present, delighted by the simple gifts I'd managed to afford. "Mom, you really should consider selling that old farm," Emma had said as they prepared to leave. "It's just sitting there, falling apart, and you could use the money." "It's been in your father's family for generations," I had replied, the same answer I always gave. Matthew had rolled his eyes. "Dad's gone, Mom. He doesn't care about some run-down piece of land anymore." His words had stung, but I had simply smiled and hugged my grandchildren goodbye, wondering when I would see them again. That evening, Grace had come over with leftover pie and a sympathetic ear. "They don't understand what the place means to you," she said as we sat in my small living room, the Christmas tree lights blinking in the corner. "No, they don't," I agreed. "To them, it's just an asset on a balance sheet. Children rarely see their parents as people with their own dreams and histories," Grace said, patting my hand. "It's just how it is." I nodded, but deep down I hoped that someday they might try to understand. That someday we might bridge the growing distance between us. Little did I know then that the farm would soon become the center of a storm that would either tear us apart forever or force us to truly see each other for the first time in years. As the weeks passed after selling the farm, I found myself enjoying simple pleasures I hadn't allowed myself in years. I bought fresh flowers for my kitchen table. I replaced my worn-out slippers with new ones that didn't have holes in the soles. Small luxuries, but they brought me joy. I considered calling my children to tell them about the sale, but always found a reason to delay. Part of me feared their reaction. Not disapproval. I had made my peace with the decision, but rather their sudden interest after years of distance. "You'll have to tell them eventually," Grace said one afternoon as we sorted through my garden harvest. "Better they hear it from you than through the grapevine." I nodded, knowing she was right, but still reluctant. "Soon," I promised. "Once I figured out exactly what I'm doing with the money." Grace gave me a knowing look, but didn't press further. That was her way, offering wisdom, then stepping back to let me find my own path. It was why we had remained friends for over 40 years. What I didn't know was that the decision would soon be taken out of my hands in the most unexpected way. Everything changed one Thursday afternoon when I was watering my tomato plants. I heard the engine of a car approaching along the dirt road that leads to my house. And when I looked up, I saw my daughter Emma's white SUV parking in front of my door. My heart skipped a beat. Oh, Emma never visited on weekdays. Her job in the city and the children's school schedules made it impractical. Something must be wrong. I set down my watering can and wiped my hands on my gardening apron, trying to calm the sudden flutter of worry in my chest. Was it one of the grandchildren? Had something happened to Matthew? "Emma!" I called, shielding my eyes from the afternoon sun. "Is everything all right?" Emma got out of the car with a strange smile. One of those smiles that I knew very well because I had seen them since she was a little girl. It was the smile she put on when she wanted to ask me for something important or when she had played a trick. She was wearing a yellow dress I had never seen her in before, high-heeled shoes that sank into the dirt of my yard, and a large handbag hanging from her arm. "Mom, what a lovely surprise to find you out here," she said, approaching to give me a kiss on the cheek, as if she was the one who lived here and I was the unexpected visitor. Her perfume was too strong, overwhelming the scent of tomato vines and damp earth. Her nails were freshly manicured, a pale pink that matched her lipstick. Everything about her seemed calculated, from her casual tone to the way she glanced around the garden as if assessing its value. "I need to talk to you about something very important." There was an edge to her voice that put me instantly on alert. The last time she had used that tone, she had been 16 and trying to convince me to let her go on an unchaperoned weekend with friends, a request John and I had firmly denied. I invited her into the house and prepared a glass of cool water with ice. We sat in my small living room, she on the sofa and I in my favorite chair, the wooden rocking chair that had been my grandmother's. Emma seemed nervous. She played with her car keys and avoided looking me directly in the eyes. The ice clinked in her untouched glass as her fingers tapped an irregular rhythm against it. "Mom," she began softly, "yesterday I was talking to Mrs. Judy, the one who lives near where your property was, and she told me something that left me very surprised." My heart started beating faster. I knew exactly where this conversation was heading, and a sense of alarm began to grow in my chest. Judy was the biggest gossip in the area, and she had clearly seen all the movement of the construction company around my property. "She told me you sold the farm." The words hung in the air between us, heavy with unasked questions. I took a deep breath, trying to decide how to respond. I hadn't planned on having this conversation today, unprepared and caught off guard. "Yes, I did," I finally said, deciding that honesty was the only path forward. "About a month ago." Emma's eyes widened slightly, more in calculation than surprise. "A month? And you didn't think to tell Matthew or me?" There was accusation in her voice, and something else, a sharpness that reminded me of the way she used to sound when she felt left out of her brother's activities as a child. "I was planning to tell you both once I had sorted through my plans," I said carefully. "It was a big decision, and I needed some time to adjust to it myself." "Mom, this is huge. That property has been in the family forever. How could you sell it without even consulting us? What did you even get for it? It couldn't have been much given the condition it was in." The dismissive way she spoke about the farm, the land her father had loved so deeply, stung more than her accusation, as if it had been worthless, a burden to be discarded rather than a heritage to be respected. "The developer made a fair offer," I said, not ready to reveal the exact amount. Something in Emma's manner had raised my guard, a protective instinct I couldn't quite explain. "How much, Mom?" Her voice was insistent now, the pretense of casual conversation abandoned. "That's not really—" "Was it over $100,000? She pressed, leaning forward. I hesitated, then nodded slightly. Emma's eyes lit up, and I immediately regretted confirming even that much. "Well," she said, her tone suddenly brighter. That's wonderful, Mom. It's actually perfect timing." "Perfect timing for what?" I asked, though I suspected I already knew the answer. Emma set down her glass and moved to sit beside me, taking my hands in hers. Her touch was cool and dry, her expression now earnest. "Mom, Aaron and I are in a bit of a situation," she began, her voice dropping to a confidential whisper. "I wasn't going to burden you with this, but since you've had this windfall—" "What kind of situation, Emma?" She looked down, a perfect picture of distress. Aaron got involved with some investors. High risk, high reward type of thing. It didn't pan out, and now we're in trouble." I waited, saying nothing. After a moment, she continued, her words coming faster now. "These aren't nice people, Mom. They've been threatening Aaron, saying they'll come after the house, after me and the kids if he doesn't pay. We need $70,000, or we could lose everything." The amount hit me like a physical blow. Nearly half of what I'd received for the farm, gone in an instant to cover my son-in-law's poor decisions. "Emma, Please, Mom," she interrupted, squeezing my hands tighter. "You don't need all that money at your age. What would you even spend it on? This way you'd be helping secure your grandchildren's future. Isn't that what Dad would have wanted?" Her invocation of John felt like a manipulation, a calculated appeal to emotions rather than a genuine belief. John had always taught our children the value of making their own way, of facing the consequences of their choices. He would never have expected me to bail them out at the expense of my own security. "I need some time to think about this," I said, gently extracting my hands from hers. "This is all very sudden." Disappointment flashed across Emma's face, quickly replaced by determination. "There isn't much time, Mom. These people want their money by the end of the month." "I understand, but I still need to consider it carefully. I'm not saying no, just that I need a few days." This wasn't entirely true. In my heart, I already knew I wouldn't be handing over such a large sum without more information, without some assurance it wouldn't simply disappear into the same black hole that had created this crisis. Emma stood up, her expression hardening. "I didn't expect you to be selfish about this, Mom. Not when your grandchildren's safety is at stake." Her accusation stung, but I kept my voice calm. "It's not selfish to be careful with decisions involving large amounts of money, Emma. Your father would tell you the same thing. Dad would have helped us without all these questions," she snapped, gathering her purse. "He always put family first." I watched her storm out to her car, feeling a complicated mix of emotions, hurt at her manipulative tactics, worry about what trouble Aaron had truly gotten them into, and a growing certainty that I had been right to keep the sale private initially. As Emma's car disappeared down the driveway in a cloud of dust, I sank back into my rocking chair, suddenly exhausted. I knew this was just the beginning. Once Matthew learned about the money, he too would come with his hand out, his reasons why he deserved a share. The money that had seemed like such a blessing just hours ago now felt like a test, one that might cost me what little relationship I still had with my children. I barely slept that night, replaying my conversation with Emma over and over in my mind. The desperation in her eyes had seemed genuine, but something about the situation felt wrong. Aaron had always lived beyond their means, always chasing the next big deal. Was this truly a threat to their safety, or just another financial hole he dug for himself? By morning, I had made a decision. I wouldn't give Emma the money, at least not directly. If Aaron truly owed dangerous people, simply handing over cash wouldn't solve the underlying problem. They would need real financial counseling, perhaps bankruptcy protection. I could help facilitate that, even offer to take the grandchildren temporarily if needed. I was preparing my morning coffee when my phone rang. Matthew's name flashed on the screen, confirming what I had suspected. Emma had wasted no time in telling her brother about the farm sale. "Mom," he said when I answered, his voice carrying the artificial cheerfulness he used when trying to manipulate a situation. "How are you doing this morning?" "I'm fine, Matthew," I replied evenly. "I assume you've spoken with your sister." He gave a short laugh. Right to the point, as always. "Yes, Emma called me last night. She was pretty upset." "I imagine she was." "Look, Mom, I think we need to have a family meeting about this. The farm was Dad's legacy to all of us, and decisions about it should have been made together." I sighed, feeling a familiar frustration rising. Matthew, your father left the farm to me, not to all of us. I maintained it alone for 8 years while you and Emma visited maybe twice a year. I think that earned me the right to make decisions about its future. There was a pause, and when Matthew spoke again, his tone had hardened. So that's how it is? You cash in on Dad's property and don't think his children deserve any say or any share? That's not what I said. It's exactly what you're saying. His voice rose, the fake pleasantness evaporating. Emma told me how much they offered you. Do you have any idea what that kind of money could do for me right now? I'm drowning here, Mom. The confession slipped out before he could stop it, revealing the real reason for his call. Not concern about family legacy or hurt feelings, but his own financial troubles. What's going on, Matthew? I asked, softening my tone. Despite everything, he was still my son, and his pain was my pain. He hesitated, then sighed heavily. I'm in a bad spot, Mom. The restaurant isn't doing well, and I made some investments that didn't pan out. I owe some people money. A lot of money. Gambling debts? I asked directly, tired of dancing around the issue we'd all pretended not to see for years. Another long pause. Yeah, he finally admitted. About 50,000. They're threatening to break my legs if I don't pay up soon. I could lose my apartment, my job, everything. I closed my eyes, feeling the weight of both my children's crises settling on my shoulders. Together, they were asking for $120,000, 2/3 of what I'd received for the farm. Money that was supposed to secure my future, to fund the dream I'd been nurturing for years. I need to think about this, Matthew. These are large sums, and I need to be sure I'm doing the right thing. What's there to think about? His voice rose again. Your children need help. Isn't that more important than whatever you're planning to do with the money? What do you even need it for at your age? It was the second time in 24 hours one of my children had dismissed my future as unimportant, as if my age rendered my dreams irrelevant. The casual ageism stung more than I cared to admit. I'll call you back in a few days, Matthew, I said firmly. I love you, but I need time to consider my options. He started to protest, but I ended the call, my hands shaking slightly. I set my phone down on the kitchen counter and moved to the window, looking out at my small garden where the morning sunlight was just beginning to touch the tomato plants. For the next week, my phone rang constantly. Emma and Matthew took turns calling, texting, and leaving voicemails, each message more urgent and guilt-inducing than the last. Emma sent photos of the grandchildren with captions like, "They miss their grandmother," and "They're counting on you." Matthew alternated between angry demands and pitiful pleas. I began screening my calls, answering only for Grace, who provided a much-needed voice of reason amid the emotional storm. They're both adults who made their own choices, she reminded me over tea on my porch. You didn't create these problems, and you may not be able to solve them, even with the farm money. But they're my children, I said, watching a hummingbird dart among my flower baskets. I can't just ignore their troubles. Grace nodded understandingly. Of course not, but there's a difference between helping and enabling. Maybe there's a middle ground, a way to assist that doesn't involve simply handing over cash. I was considering her words when my phone chimed with a text message. It was from Emma, and the content sent a chill through me. Aaron found a lawyer who says we can petition for conservatorship if we can prove you're not making sound financial decisions. Selling family property without consulting family could be evidence. Please don't force us to go this route. Just help us, and this all goes away. I showed the message to Grace, whose face darkened with concern. That's not just emotional manipulation anymore, Sandra. That's a threat. They're talking about trying to take control of your finances, your independence. Would that even be possible? I asked, my stomach knotting with anxiety. I'm perfectly capable of managing my own affairs. It would be difficult, but not impossible, if they find an unethical lawyer and doctor willing to support their claims, Grace said grimly. Elder law is complicated, and sometimes the system can be manipulated. What should I do? Grace took my hand firmly. First, don't delete that text. It's evidence of coercion. Second, I think it's time you speak with a lawyer of your own, someone who specializes in elder law and can advise you properly. As Grace helped me research local attorneys, my phone rang again. This time it was a number I didn't recognize. Against my better judgment, I answered. Mrs. Mason? A smooth male voice inquired. This is Franklin Morris, an attorney representing your daughter Emma and her husband. I was hoping we could schedule a meeting to discuss some family concerns they've brought to my attention. The casual way he referenced family concerns, as if my children's financial irresponsibility was somehow my responsibility, solidified my resolve. Mr. Morris, I replied, straightening my spine though he couldn't see me. I am not interested in meeting at this time. If you have legal matters to discuss, you may contact my attorney, whom I am in the process of retaining. Good day. I ended the call before he could respond, feeling a strange mix of fear and determination. The pressure was mounting, but something in me had hardened. The money from the farm represented not just financial security, but the freedom to make my own choices after decades of putting everyone else first. As I looked at the lawyer's website Grace had found, Olivia Washington, specializing in elder law and protection, I knew I was about to enter a battle I had never anticipated fighting, a battle against my own children for my right to control my own destiny. The thought broke my heart, but I would not be bullied or manipulated, not even by the people I loved most in the world. John would have expected me to stand my ground, and that's exactly what I intended to do. Little did I know just how ugly this fight was about to become. 3 days after receiving Emma's threatening text, I was sitting on my porch swing, watching the sunset and trying to calm my nerves. I had an appointment with attorney Olivia Washington the next morning, but until then, all I could do was wait and worry. Grace had offered to stay with me, but I'd sent her home, needing some time alone with my thoughts. The crunch of tires on gravel pulled me from my reverie. 2 vehicles were coming up my driveway, Emma's white SUV followed by Matthew's blue sedan. My heart started pounding immediately. They had never coordinated a visit before, and the fact that they were arriving together, unannounced, sent alarm bells ringing in my head. I considered going inside and locking the door, but pride kept me seated. This was my home. I would not hide. Matthew emerged from his car first, slamming the door with unnecessary force. Even from a distance, I could see the tightness in his jaw, the stiff set of his shoulders. Emma stepped out more carefully, her face a mask of determination. Behind her, Aaron emerged, adjusting his designer sunglasses. I hadn't expected him to come, and his presence only increased my apprehension. "Mom," Matthew called, his voice carrying across the yard. "We need to talk, all of us." I nodded, staying seated. "I'm listening." They approached the porch, Matthew taking the steps 2 at a time while Emma and Aaron followed more slowly. Up close, Matthew looked terrible, unshaven, with dark circles under his eyes and a slight tremor in his hands that spoke of either too much alcohol or too little. The scent of whiskey hung around him like cologne. "You've been avoiding our calls," he said, looming over me. "I've been processing," I replied evenly. "This is a significant situation for all of us." Emma sat beside me on the swing, a strategic move that felt more calculated than affectionate. "Mom, we're running out of time. Aaron's associates are getting impatient. And my creditors aren't exactly sending me friendly reminders anymore," Matthew added, pacing the length of the porch. They paid a visit to the restaurant yesterday, made a scene in front of customers. I looked between my two children, feeling a profound sadness. Where had we gone so wrong? When had money become more important than our relationship? I understand you're both in difficult situations, I began carefully. And I want to help, but simply handing over most of the money from the farm sale isn't the solution. Aaron stepped forward, his voice smooth as silk. With all due respect, Sandra, what else would you use the money for? You live simply. Your needs are few. Wouldn't you rather see that money help your family than just sit in a bank account? The condescension in his tone made my skin crawl, as if my age and lifestyle somehow made my financial autonomy less valid than theirs. I have plans for that money, I said firmly, plans that matter deeply to me. What plans? Matthew demanded, stopping his pacing to stare at me. What could possibly be more important than keeping your children safe? I hesitated. The truth was I hadn't shared my dream with anyone except Grace. It felt too personal, too vulnerable to expose, especially now when it would be seen only as an obstacle to their demands. That's my business, Matthew. Your business? He laughed harshly. When your business affects your family's well-being, it becomes our business too. Emma placed a hand on my arm, her touch light, but her grip surprisingly strong. Mom, please. Jacob and Lily could be in danger if these men come looking for Aaron. Is whatever you're planning worth risking your grandchildren? The emotional manipulation was so transparent, yet it still twisted my heart. The grandchildren had always been my weakness, and Emma knew it. I'm not saying I won't help at all, I said, choosing my words carefully. But I'm meeting with a financial advisor to explore options that might actually solve the underlying problems, not just throw money at the symptoms. Financial advisor? Aaron scoffed. We don't need financial advice, Sandra. We need cash, and we need it now. Matthew stepped closer, his expression darkening. You're stalling. You've always been like this, overthinking, overanalyzing until the moment passes. Well, we don't have that luxury right now. I'm being prudent, I countered, rising from the swing to stand my ground. Your father would have done the same. Don't bring Dad into this, Matthew shouted, his face flushing red. He would have helped us without all this questioning and judgment. Your father taught you both about responsibility and consequences, I said, my own anger rising now. He wouldn't have approved of gambling debts or shady investment schemes. You have no idea what Dad would have wanted, Emma jumped in, standing beside her brother in a united front. You're just being selfish and stubborn. Selfish? I repeated, the word hitting like a physical blow. I've spent my entire life putting this family first. Every decision, every sacrifice was for you and your father. And now that I finally have the chance to do something meaningful for myself, you call me selfish? Something meaningful like what? Matthew sneered. A cruise? A new TV? What could you possibly need at your age that's worth more than your children's safety? The dismissal in his voice, the implication that at 64 my dreams were somehow less valid than his, ignited something in me. A lifetime of accommodation and compromise coalesced into a moment of pure, righteous anger. This is my money, I said, my voice low but firm. Mine to decide how to use. Not yours, not Emma's, mine. And I will not be bullied or manipulated into giving it away, not even to my children. A dangerous silence fell over the porch. I could see something changing in Matthew's eyes, a darkness gathering like storm clouds. His hands clenched into fists at his sides, trembling slightly. You ungrateful, selfish old woman, he hissed, stepping toward me. After everything we've done for you. What exactly have you done, Matthew? I interrupted, refusing to back down. Visit twice a year? Call on holidays? While I've been here alone, maintaining Dad's property? Working 3 jobs sometimes just to make ends meet? "Stop it!" Emma shouted, but neither of us was listening anymore. "I'm your son!" Matthew roared, his face inches from mine now. "That should count for something." "And I'm your mother," I replied steadily. "That should count for something too." What happened next occurred so quickly I barely had time to register it. Matthew's face contorted with rage, and he gave me a hard shove. I stumbled backward, off balance, and felt my side hit the corner of the old wooden hope chest that had sat on my porch for decades. A sharp, searing pain exploded in my ribs as I crumpled to the floor. Through the haze of pain, I heard Emma scream. Aaron shouted something. Matthew stood frozen, horror replacing rage on his face as he stared at his hands as if they belonged to someone else. "Mom?" His voice sounded distant, shocked. "Mom, I didn't mean to." I couldn't respond. Each breath sent daggers through my side. Black spots danced at the edges of my vision as I tried to focus, to stay conscious. "We need to call an ambulance," I heard Aaron say. "No!" Matthew's voice was panicked now. "No police, no reports. I can't have an assault charge. I'll lose my job." "She's hurt, Matthew." Emma's face appeared above me, pale and frightened. "It was an accident," Matthew insisted. "Mom, tell them it was an accident." I looked up at my son, this stranger wearing my child's face, and felt a profound sadness, greater than the physical pain radiating through my body. "Go," I whispered, each word an agony. "All of you, just go." "We can't leave her like this," Emma protested, but her voice lacked conviction. "She's made her choice," Matthew said, backing toward the steps. "She chose money over her family. Let her deal with the consequences." Emma hesitated, torn between staying with me and following her brother. In that moment, I saw the little girl she had once been, caught between doing what was right and what was easy. "Emma," I managed, reaching for her hand. "Please." She pulled away, her expression hardening. "I'm sorry, Mom, but Matthew's right. We need that money, and you're choosing to let us suffer." With that, she turned and followed her brother and husband down the steps. I heard car doors slam, engines start. Through tears of pain, I watched my children drive away, leaving me injured and alone on the porch of the home their father had built. As darkness fell around me, I fumbled for my phone, thanking Providence that it was in my pocket. With trembling fingers, I dialed the only person I knew would come. "Grace," I whispered when she answered. "I need help." The emergency room was bright and cold, bustling with activity even at 9 o'clock in the evening. Grace sat beside my gurney, her face lined with worry and barely contained fury. She had found me curled on my porch, struggling to breathe, and had driven me straight to Memorial Hospital without asking questions. "Mrs. Mason?" A tall, gray-haired doctor pulled back the curtain surrounding my bed area. "I'm Dr. Thomas Reed. Let's take a look at those ribs." His hands were gentle as he examined me, but even the lightest touch made me wince. After reviewing the x-rays a nurse had taken earlier, he confirmed what I already suspected. "You have a fracture in your 7th rib," he said, his kind eyes serious behind wire-rimmed glasses. "Fortunately, it's not displaced, so we won't need surgery. But it will take about 6 weeks to heal completely, and you'll need to be careful during that time." He paused, studying my face. "Mrs. Mason, I need to ask, how did this injury occur?" I glanced at Grace, whose expression clearly communicated what she thought I should say. The truth, but the words stuck in my throat. Despite everything, Matthew was still my son. "I fell," I said finally. "Lost my balance on the porch and hit the corner of a chest." Dr. Reed's eyes narrowed slightly, skepticism evident in his expression. "Mrs. Mason, I've been an emergency physician for 30 years. The force required to fracture a rib like this..." A simple fall rarely causes this kind of injury. When I didn't respond, he continued more gently. I understand this is difficult, but if someone hurt you, we can help. There are resources, protections for elder... I'm not an elder abuse case, I interrupted more sharply than I intended. The term itself, elder abuse, felt like an additional insult, a reminder of how the world now categorized me. Not just Sandra, but elderly Sandra, vulnerable Sandra, a victim. Dr. Reed nodded respectfully. All right, but my door is open if you change your mind. He wrote a prescription for pain medication and provided instructions for care before leaving us alone. As soon as he was gone, Grace leaned forward. Sandra Mason, I have known you for 40 years, and I have never known you to be a coward or a liar. What are you doing? It's complicated, Grace. No, it's not. Matthew assaulted you. He pushed you so hard he broke your rib, and then he and Emma left you there, injured and alone. There's nothing complicated about that. I closed my eyes, suddenly exhausted. He's my son. Being your son doesn't give him the right to hurt you, Grace said firmly. What if he had pushed you harder? What if you had hit your head instead of your side? You could have died out there, alone on that porch. The truth of her words sank in, heavy and undeniable. Matthew's actions had crossed a line that couldn't be uncrossed. And Emma's choice to leave, that had been its own kind of violence. I'm meeting with the attorney tomorrow, I said finally. Olivia Washington. I'll tell her everything, including what happened today. But I'm not ready to file a police report. Not yet. Grace didn't look happy, but she nodded. Fair enough. But you're not staying alone tonight. You're coming home with me. I can manage. This isn't negotiable, Sandra, Grace interrupted. My guest room is already made up, and I'm not taking no for an answer. You need help, and that's what friends are for. Too tired and in too much pain to argue, I nodded gratefully. As Grace helped me into her car after I was discharged, I thought about Matthew, wondering where he was and what he was feeling. Was he sorry? Did he regret what he'd done? Or was he just worried about the consequences for himself? Later that night, lying in Grace's guest room with pain radiating through my side, despite the medication, I checked my phone. 3 missed calls from Emma, 1 from Matthew, and 2 text messages. From Emma. Mom, please call us. We're worried about you. Aaron is looking into some options that could help everyone. From Matthew. I'm sorry about what happened. I was drunk and desperate. But we still need to talk about the money. Call me. Not a single genuine apology. No acknowledgement of the severity of what had happened. Just continued pressure about the money and a justification for violence. Being drunk and desperate, as if that excused everything. For the first time, I saw my children clearly. Not as the little ones I had raised, but as the adults they had become. Adults who were willing to hurt me, physically and emotionally, to get what they wanted. The realization was like a second injury, one that no doctor could treat. I set the phone aside without responding and stared at the unfamiliar ceiling, tears sliding silently into my hair. The physical pain was nothing compared to the heartbreak of recognizing that the children I had raised, the ones I had sacrificed everything for, had grown into people capable of such callousness. Sleep eluded me for most of the night. In the quiet darkness, I found myself talking to John as I often did in difficult moments. What would you do, John? I whispered. They're still our children. In the stillness, I could almost hear his reply. They're adults who made choices, Sandy. Bad ones. Love them, but don't let them hurt you. That's not what we raised them to do. By morning, I had made my decision. I loved my children, would always love them. But I would not allow them to bully, manipulate, or harm me. Not for money, not for anything. Whatever happened next, I would face it with the same strength and dignity John had always admired in me. What I didn't yet realize was just how far Emma and Aaron were willing to go in their pursuit of my money. While I was resting at Grace's house, recovering from my fractured rib and preparing for my meeting with attorney Olivia Washington, Emma and Aaron were sitting in the well-appointed office of Franklin Morris. The office was designed to impress, with leather-bound law books lining the walls and certificates displayed prominently behind a massive mahogany desk. Emma shifted uncomfortably in her chair, her conscience still troubled by the image of her mother crumpled on the porch. But Aaron sat relaxed, one leg crossed over the other, as if they were discussing nothing more consequential than a real estate transaction. "So as I was explaining on the phone," Morris said, steepling his fingers, "establishing a conservatorship isn't simple, but it is doable under certain circumstances. We would need to demonstrate that your mother is no longer capable of making sound financial decisions." "Which she clearly isn't," Aaron interjected smoothly. "Selling family property without consulting family, refusing to help her children in a crisis. These aren't the actions of someone thinking clearly." Emma frowned slightly. "But Mom seems perfectly lucid. She manages her household, pays her bills on time, maintains her garden." Morris waved a dismissive hand. "Physical competence isn't the same as financial competence. Many elderly people can handle day-to-day tasks, but become confused or irrational about larger financial matters." He leaned forward. "Has she been exhibiting any unusual behaviors? Forgetting important dates? Becoming disoriented? Making strange purchases?" Emma hesitated. The truth was her mother had always been sharp as a tack, organized and methodical in all things. But Aaron jumped in before she could speak. "She's been increasingly paranoid," he said with conviction. "Hiding documents, refusing to discuss the farm sale, accusing us of only wanting her money. Classic signs of age-related paranoia." Morris nodded, making notes. Good. And has she had any recent medical issues? Falls? Memory lapses? Anything that might indicate cognitive decline?" "She fell recently," Emma said quietly, the half-truth bitter on her tongue. "Hurt her ribs." "Perfect," Morris said, not noticing her discomfort. "That could suggest balance problems, which might indicate mini-strokes or other neurological issues. We'll definitely want to include that in our petition." The casual way he seized on her mother's injury, an injury caused by Matthew's violence, not by any medical condition, made Emma's stomach turn. This felt wrong, deeply wrong. But every time she wavered, she thought of Aaron's investors and their increasingly threatening messages, of her children who might be in danger if those men came looking for payment. "What would happen," she asked, "if we got this conservatorship?" Morris smiled, clearly sensing a fee in his future. "We would petition the court to appoint a guardian, likely your husband as he has financial expertise, to manage your mother's assets and financial decisions. The court would require a medical evaluation, which is why having a sympathetic doctor is crucial." "And you mentioned you know someone?" Aaron prompted. Morris nodded, lowering his voice conspiratorially. "Dr. Richard Kelly. He's helped me with similar cases. For a consultation fee of $10,000, he can provide an evaluation supporting our claim of diminished capacity." $10,000? Emma gasped. "We don't have that kind of money. That's why we're here in the first place." "Consider it an investment," Morris replied smoothly. "One that will yield a return of $180,000 if successful. And I'm willing to take my fee as a percentage of the recovered assets, so you don't need to pay me up front." Aaron smiled, clearly pleased with this arrangement. "When can we get started?" Morris pulled out a calendar. "I can draft the petition immediately. We'll need to get Dr. Kelly in to evaluate your mother within the week. The sooner we move, the less time she has to spend or hide the money." Emma felt sick, but she nodded along. They had crossed a line with the visit to her mother's house, and now they were crossing another. But what choice did they have? Aaron had made that clear on the drive home from her mother's house, after Matthew had stormed off in his own car. "It's us or her, Emma," he had said, his voice hard. "Either we get that money, or we lose everything. The house, the cars, maybe even the kids if these guys decide to make an example of me. Is that what you want? For the children to pay the price of your mother's stubbornness?" Put that way, what could she say? Her mother was elderly, lived simply, and had few needs. The money would do far more good in their hands. At least that's what Emma told herself as she signed the preliminary papers Morris pushed across the desk. What she didn't know, what none of them knew, was that Sandra Mason was far from the helpless old woman they believed her to be. And she was about to prove it. The next morning, Grace drove me to my appointment with attorney Olivia Washington. The law office was modest but professional, located in a converted Victorian house near downtown. My ribs ached despite the pain medication, making every step a reminder of yesterday's confrontation. Olivia Washington was not what I expected. I had pictured someone older, perhaps near my own age, but the woman who greeted us was in her early 50s at most, with short natural hair peppered with gray and bright, intelligent eyes that missed nothing. She rose from behind her desk when her assistant showed us in, coming around to help me to a comfortable chair. "Mrs. Mason," she said, her handshake firm but gentle. "Dr. Reed called me about your case. I'm glad you decided to come in." I glanced at Grace in surprise. She shrugged, looking equally puzzled. "Don't worry," Olivia continued, returning to her seat. "Doctor-attorney communications are privileged when they concern a patient's well-being. Doctor, Reed was concerned after treating you last night and wanted to make sure you had proper legal support." "That was thoughtful of him," I said, touched by the doctor's concern. "Thomas is a good man," Olivia said with a small smile. "Now why don't you tell me what's going on? Take your time." Over the next hour, I explained everything: the farm sale, my children's financial troubles, their demands for money, Matthew's violence, and Emma's threat about conservatorship. Olivia listened without interruption, taking occasional notes but mostly maintaining eye contact, her expression compassionate but professional. When I finished, she sat back and regarded me thoughtfully. "First, I want to say how sorry I am that you're going through this. Family conflicts over money are among the most painful cases I handle." "Do they happen often?" I asked, somehow comforted by the idea that I wasn't alone in this situation. "More often than you'd think," Olivia replied with a sad smile, "especially when elderly parents come into money through property sales, inheritance, or insurance payouts. Adult children can develop a sense of entitlement to those funds, particularly if they're experiencing financial difficulties themselves." She leaned forward, her expression earnest. "Mrs. Mason, I need to be direct. Based on what you've told me, your situation is serious. Your son has committed assault, and your daughter and son-in-law are contemplating legal action that would strip you of your financial autonomy. We need to act quickly to protect you and your assets." The blunt assessment was frightening, but also oddly relieving. Having someone acknowledge the severity of my situation without minimizing it or suggesting I was overreacting validated feelings I'd been trying to suppress. "What can we do?" I asked. "Several things," Olivia said, shifting into a more practical tone. "First, we need to document your current mental and physical capacity. I'll arrange for you to be evaluated by a respected geriatric specialist, not to imply you need geriatric care, but because their assessment will carry more weight if your daughter does file for conservatorship." I nodded, swallowing my instinctive resistance to being evaluated by a geriatric specialist. This wasn't the time for pride. Second, Olivia continued, we should secure your assets. I'm concerned that if your children are desperate enough, they might try to access your accounts directly. They don't have access to my accounts, I assured her. Are you certain? Olivia asked gently. No joint accounts from years ago? No documents where you might have listed them as authorized users? Many parents do this when children go to college and never think to remove them later. I started to shake my head, then paused, remembering. There is one account, a small checking account I opened when Matthew was in college. I added him so he could deposit his work-study checks. I haven't used it in years, but I never closed it. Olivia nodded. We should address that immediately, and we'll want to change passwords on all your online accounts, just to be safe. Is all this really necessary? Grace asked, speaking up for the first time. It feels like we're preparing for war against Sandra's own children. Olivia's expression softened. I understand how this feels, but I've seen too many cases where family members emptied accounts or took other drastic actions when they felt entitled to money. I hope none of that happens here, but I believe in being prepared. She turned back to me. There's one more thing we should discuss, Mrs. Mason. The assault. I tensed, knowing what was coming. I strongly recommend filing a police report, Olivia said, her tone gentle but firm. I know that's a difficult step to take against your own son, but it establishes a record of his behavior. That could be crucial if this situation escalates. I can't send my son to jail, I said, the words catching in my throat. Olivia reached across the desk and briefly touched my hand. Filing a report doesn't automatically mean he'll be arrested or jailed, but it creates an official record that could be important for your protection going forward. I looked down at my hands, thinking of the little boy Matthew had once been, earnest and kind, always trying to make me laugh when I was sad. How had we come to this? I need to think about that part, I said finally. Olivia nodded. I understand. We'll focus on the other protective measures for now. She picked up a pen. There's something else I think you should know, Mrs. Mason. Something personal that might help you understand why I take these cases so seriously. I looked up, surprised by the shift. 10 years ago, my own son manipulated me out of my retirement savings, Olivia said, her voice steady but with an undercurrent of old pain. He was addicted to drugs, though he hid it well, and he convinced me he needed the money for a business opportunity. By the time I realized what was happening, nearly $200,000 was gone. I had to postpone retirement and start over financially at 55. I'm so sorry, I said, genuinely moved by her vulnerability. It was a hard lesson, she acknowledged, but it led me to specialize in elder law, to help others avoid similar situations. So when I say I understand what you're going through, the love for your child warring with the need to protect yourself, I truly do. In that moment, I knew I had found not just a lawyer, but an ally who genuinely comprehended the complex emotions I was experiencing. It gave me the courage to ask the question that had been weighing on me since I entered her office. There's something else, I said hesitantly. Something I haven't told many people about why I'm reluctant to give away the money from the farm. Grace looked at me curiously. Even she didn't know the full story, only that I had plans for the money. Go on, Olivia encouraged. I took a deep breath and shared the dream I had been nurturing for years. The real reason I needed the farm money, the legacy I hoped to create. As I spoke, I saw understanding dawn in Olivia's eyes, followed by a deep respect that bolstered my resolve. That's remarkable, she said when I finished. And all the more reason to make sure you retain control of those funds. What you're planning could help so many people. My children would say I'm choosing strangers over family, I said softly. You're choosing to honor a promise and create meaningful change, Olivia corrected firmly. That's not something to apologize for. We spent the next hour developing a comprehensive plan to protect me legally and financially. By the time we left, I had scheduled appointments with a geriatric specialist and a financial advisor, changed passwords on all my accounts, and begun the process of securing my assets. I had also recorded a detailed statement about recent events, which Olivia would keep on file in case it was needed later. As Grace helped me back into her car, I felt something I hadn't experienced in days. Hope. I might be bruised and in pain, but I was not powerless. With the right help, I could weather this storm and perhaps even salvage some kind of relationship with my children once the crisis had passed. What I didn't know was that Emma, Aaron, and their attorney were already setting their plan in motion, and that we would be facing each other much sooner than any of us expected. For the next 2 days, I stayed with Grace, following Olivia's advice to avoid being alone in case Matthew or Emma returned. My ribs throbbed constantly despite the medication, making sleep difficult and every movement a reminder of that terrible confrontation. I had ignored multiple calls and texts from both of my children, not yet ready to engage with them. Olivia had advised minimal contact until we had established all our protective measures, and I was inclined to agree. The few messages I did read showed neither genuine remorse nor concern for my well-being, only continued pressure about the money. On the 3rd day after the incident, I had a follow-up appointment with Dr. Reed to check my ribs. Grace drove me to the hospital, insisting on accompanying me inside despite my assurances that I could manage. "I'm not letting you out of my sight until we're sure those children of yours aren't going to try anything else," she declared, her protective instinct touching in its fierceness. The hospital was busy, the waiting room crowded with patients of all ages. We had just checked in at the reception desk when a familiar voice called my name. Turning carefully to avoid jarring my ribs, I found myself face to face with Emma, Aaron, and a man I didn't recognize but immediately identified as a lawyer from his expensive suit and leather portfolio. "Mom," Emma said, her voice falsely bright. "What a coincidence. We were just coming to see you." Grace stepped closer to my side, her expression wary. "Some coincidence. How did you know Sandra would be here?" Emma flushed slightly. We called your house, and when you didn't answer, we thought you might be at a doctor's appointment. We tried a few places. The explanation was flimsy at best, suggesting they had been monitoring my movements or perhaps called the hospital directly. Either way, this was clearly no coincidence. "Mrs. Mason," the unknown man said, extending his hand. "Franklin Morris, attorney at law. I've been working with your daughter and son-in-law on some family matters. Is there somewhere private we could talk?" "No," I said firmly, not taking his offered hand. "There isn't. I'm here for a medical appointment, not a legal consultation." Morris smiled thinly. "This won't take long. We have some papers we'd like you to review regarding your financial management. Given your recent accident, your daughter is concerned about your ability to handle complex financial matters independently." The emphasis he placed on accident made it clear he knew or suspected the truth about my injury. I felt a surge of both anger and fear. They were moving quickly, more quickly than Olivia had anticipated. "My mother is perfectly capable of managing her own affairs," Emma said, her voice carrying a rehearsed quality. "But we're worried about her judgment lately. The fall that injured her ribs is just one example of her declining abilities. The deliberate mischaracterization of my injury, an injury her brother had caused and she had witnessed, stunned me into momentary silence. How could she stand there and lie so blatantly? Grace had no such hesitation. "That is absolutely not what happened, and you know it, Emma Mason. Your brother pushed your mother so hard he broke her rib, and you both left her lying there in pain. How dare you try to use that as evidence of her incompetence?" Several heads turned in the waiting room, drawn by Grace's raised voice. Emma's face reddened, but Aaron stepped smoothly into the breach. "Mrs. Johnson, with all due respect, you weren't there. My wife and I are simply concerned about Sandra's well-being. These papers are just a precaution to ensure her assets are properly managed during her recovery." "May I see these papers?" I asked, my voice steadier than I felt. Morris handed me a document folder with an air of triumph. Opening it, I quickly scanned the contents, my heart sinking as I recognized the petition for temporary conservatorship. They had moved even faster than I feared, already preparing legal documents. "This petition claims I'm showing signs of dementia and financial incompetence," I said, looking directly at Emma. "Is that really what you believe? Or is it just a convenient way to get control of my money?" Emma couldn't meet my eyes. "Mom, it's not like that. We're worried about you." "Mrs. Mason," Morris interjected, "this is a temporary measure until you've recovered. Your daughter and son-in-law would simply manage your finances while you focus on healing. Once you're better, we can reassess." I might have been intimidated if not for my meeting with Olivia. Now I recognized the tactics for what they were. A calculated attempt to catch me off guard, pressure me into signing something while I was vulnerable and without legal representation. "I will not be signing this or any other document without my attorney present," I said firmly, handing the folder back to Morris. "Now, if you'll excuse me, I have a medical appointment." Morris's expression hardened. "Your attorney? So you've already lawyered up against your own family? That seems unnecessarily adversarial, Mrs. Mason." "No more adversarial than ambushing an injured woman at a hospital with legal papers aimed at taking control of her finances," a new voice cut in. We all turned to see Olivia Washington approaching, briefcase in hand, an expression formidable. I nearly sagged with relief at the sight of her. "Olivia Washington, counsel for Mrs. Mason," she said briskly, positioning herself beside me. "And you are?" Morris straightened, clearly recalibrating now that he realized I had legal representation. "Franklin Morris. I represent Emma and Aaron Reynolds in a family matter concerning Mrs. Mason's welfare." "A family matter you chose to address by ambushing my client at a medical facility?" Olivia's tone was ice. "Interesting approach, counselor." "We merely wanted to express our concerns," Aaron began, but Olivia cut him off with a raised hand. "Mr. Reynolds, I suggest you save your explanations for court, should this matter proceed that far." She turned to Morris. "I'll be reviewing any and all petitions you file regarding my client, and I should inform you that we've already taken steps to document Mrs. Mason's mental and financial competence, including assessments by multiple independent specialists." I watched as Morris's confident expression faltered slightly. This clearly wasn't the easy victory he had anticipated. "Furthermore," Olivia continued, "we have documented evidence regarding the true nature of Mrs. Mason's injury, including witness statements and medical records that directly contradict the accident narrative in your petition." Emma paled visibly at this, finally seeming to understand the seriousness of the situation. "Mom," she said, her voice smaller now, "we just want what's best for everyone." "What's best for everyone," I replied, finding strength in Olivia's presence, "would be for you and your brother to respect my decisions and my autonomy. I am not a bank account to be raided when you're in financial trouble. I am your mother." "This isn't over," Aaron muttered, but Morris placed a restraining hand on his arm. "We should continue this discussion at another time," the lawyer said smoothly, though his eyes betrayed his annoyance at being outmaneuvered. "Mrs. Mason, we hope you'll reconsider our proposal." "I won't," I said simply. As they turned to leave, Emma hesitated, looking back at me with an expression I couldn't quite read. Regret? Frustration? For a moment I thought she might break from Aaron, might choose her mother over money. But then the moment passed, and she followed her husband from the waiting room without another word. When they were gone, I turned to Olivia in amazement. "How did you know to come?" She smiled. "Dr. Reed called me when Emma and her husband started asking questions at the reception desk about your appointment. He remembered them from your emergency room visit and was concerned about their intentions. I made a mental note to thank the doctor properly. They're moving faster than we expected." Olivia nodded grimly. "They are, but so are we. The specialist evaluated you yesterday, and I received his preliminary report this morning. It clearly states you're of sound mind and fully capable of managing your own affairs. We're in a strong position, Sandra. As Dr. Reed called my name for my appointment, I felt a strange mixture of sadness and determination. The confrontation in the hospital waiting room had made it clear that this conflict would not be resolved easily or amicably. My children, or at least Emma and Aaron, were prepared to go to extraordinary lengths to get the farm money, but I was equally determined to stand my ground. This wasn't just about money anymore. It was about dignity, autonomy, and the right to make my own choices, regardless of my age. The battle lines had been drawn. Now it remained to be seen who would prevail. 2 weeks after the confrontation at the hospital, I found myself sitting in the Wood County Courthouse, awaiting the hearing that would determine whether my children could take control of my finances. The polished wooden benches were hard and unforgiving, much like the situation I found myself in. Olivia sat beside me, calm and professional in a navy suit, organizing documents in a leather portfolio. On the other side of the aisle, Emma and Aaron whispered to each other while Franklin Morris reviewed papers with an air of smug confidence. Matthew sat a few rows behind them, uncomfortable in a suit that looked like it had been purchased specifically for the occasion. "Are you ready for this?" Olivia asked quietly. I nodded, though my stomach was in knots. As ready as I'll ever be to face my own children in court. The pain in my ribs had subsided to a dull ache, but the emotional wound of their betrayal remained raw and throbbing. I had barely slept the night before, torn between righteous anger and a mother's instinctive desire to protect her children, even from the consequences of their own actions. "Remember," Olivia said, "Judge Coleman has a reputation for being thorough and fair. She doesn't rush to judgment, and she takes elder rights very seriously." "I just want this over with," I whispered, my voice catching. I never imagined I'd be fighting my own children for the right to control my life. The bailiff called the court to order, and we all rose as Judge Harriet Coleman entered. She was a formidable woman in her 60s, with silver hair cropped short and penetrating eyes that seemed to evaluate everyone in the room simultaneously. "Be seated," she said, her voice firm but not unkind. "We're here regarding the matter of Reynolds v. Mason, a petition for temporary conservatorship." She looked over her glasses at the attorneys. "I've reviewed the filings from both parties. Let's begin with the petitioners. Mr. Morris?" Morris rose, buttoning his expensive suit jacket. "Thank you, Your Honor. We're seeking temporary conservatorship over Sandra Mason's financial affairs due to concerns about her mental capacity and decision-making abilities. Mrs. Mason recently came into a significant sum of money from selling family property, and she has been making concerning decisions, including refusing to help her family during a financial crisis." Judge Coleman's expression remained neutral. "And the basis for questioning her capacity?" "Mrs. C's. Mason has exhibited paranoia, confusion about financial matters, and recently suffered a fall resulting in a rib injury, potentially indicating balance or coordination issues that could suggest neurological problems. We have an affidavit from Dr. Richard Kelly suggesting these symptoms warrant further evaluation." I felt my face flush with indignation at the blatant mischaracterization of my fall, but Olivia placed a calming hand on my arm. "Ms. Washington?" the judge prompted. Olivia stood, her presence commanding despite her average height. "Your Honor, we categorically deny all allegations regarding Mrs. Mason's mental capacity. We have comprehensive evaluations from Dr. Eleanor Phillips, a respected geriatric specialist, confirming that Mrs. Mason is of sound mind and fully capable of managing her own financial affairs. She paused, then continued with measured emphasis. Furthermore, we contest the characterization of Mrs. Mason's injury as a fall. Mrs. Mason was physically assaulted by her son, Matthew Mason, during a confrontation about the very money that is at issue in this case. A murmur ran through the courtroom. Emma's face paled, and Matthew shifted uncomfortably in his seat. "That's a serious allegation, Counselor," Judge Coleman said, her gaze sharpening. "Do you have evidence to support it?" "We do, Your Honor. We have Mrs. Mason's medical records, the treating physician's notes indicating the injury was inconsistent with a simple fall, and a sworn statement from Grace Johnson, who discovered Mrs. Mason injured and transported her to the hospital." The judge turned her penetrating gaze to Morris. "Did you investigate the circumstances of Mrs. Mason's injury before including it in your petition, Mr. Morris?" Morris looked momentarily flustered. "We relied on the accounts of our clients, Your Honor." "I see." The single phrase conveyed volumes of skepticism. "Let's proceed with witness testimony." Over the next 2 hours, the ugly truth of the situation unfolded before the court. Emma testified first, attempting to paint me as increasingly confused and paranoid, but faltering under Olivia's cross-examination. "Mrs. Reynolds," Olivia asked, her tone deceptively gentle, "you testified that your mother has become paranoid about her finances. Could you provide specific examples of this paranoia?" Emma shifted uncomfortably. She refused to discuss the farm sale with us, and she wouldn't tell us what she planned to do with the money." "Is privacy the same as paranoia, Mrs. Reynolds?" Olivia asked. "Is it paranoid for an adult to make financial decisions without consulting her adult children?" "No, and isn't it true that immediately after learning about the farm sale, you demanded $70,000 from your mother, claiming your husband owed money to dangerous people?" Emma's eyes widened. "I didn't demand, I asked for help in a difficult situation. Did you or did you not send a text message to your mother suggesting that if she didn't give you the money, you would have her declared incompetent?" Olivia held up a printout of the message I had shown her during our first meeting. Emma's face crumpled. "I was desperate. Aaron said it was the only way." Aaron, testifying next, attempted to present himself as the concerned son-in-law, but his facade cracked when Olivia pressed him on his financial troubles. "Mr. Reynolds, isn't it true that you've had 5 properties foreclosed in the last 3 years? That you've borrowed money from at least 3 different high-interest lenders? That you've been sued twice by former clients for misrepresentation in real estate transactions?" With each question, Aaron's polished veneer slipped further. By the time Matthew took the stand, the tide of the hearing had clearly turned. Matthew looked haggard, his hands trembling slightly as he was sworn in. Unlike Emma and Aaron, he made no attempt to maintain the fiction that this was about my well-being. "Yes, I pushed my mother," he admitted, his voice barely audible. "I was drunk and desperate. I owe money to some very dangerous people because of my gambling. I thought if she would just help us out, everything would be okay." He looked directly at me for the first time. "I never meant to hurt you, Mom. I swear. I lost control." His raw honesty, however belated, pierced my heart. I saw in his face the little boy who had once run to me with skinned knees and broken toys, trusting me to fix everything. But I couldn't fix this for him. He needed to face the consequences of his actions if he was ever going to change. When it was my turn to testify, I spoke directly and honestly about the farm sale, my plans for the money, and the subsequent pressure and abuse from my children. "Mrs. Mason," Judge Coleman asked after I'd finished my testimony, "why didn't you file a police report after your son injured you?" I glanced at Matthew, who was staring at the floor. Because I still love my son, Your Honor. I don't want him in jail. I want him to get help for his gambling and drinking problems. But I also won't let him or my daughter bully me or take control of my finances. I'm 64, not 94. I'm perfectly capable of managing my own affairs. Judge Coleman nodded, something like approval flickering in her eyes. And what do you plan to do with the proceeds from the farm sale, Mrs. Mason? Your children seem to believe you have no significant use for such a sum. This was the moment I had been waiting for, the chance to reveal what I had kept private for so long. I took a deep breath and shared my dream, watching the judge's expression soften as I spoke. When the testimonies were complete, Judge Coleman removed her glasses and addressed the courtroom. I've heard enough to make a ruling. This petition for conservatorship is denied. She looked directly at Emma and Aaron. Furthermore, I'm issuing a restraining order preventing both of you from approaching Mrs. Mason or attempting to access her finances in any way for the next 90 days. She turned to Matthew. Mr. Mason, while no formal charges have been filed regarding the assault on your mother, I strongly suggest you seek treatment for your gambling and alcohol issues immediately. This court takes elder abuse very seriously, and you've admitted to actions that could result in criminal charges. Finally, she looked at me. Mrs. Mason, this court affirms your right to manage your own finances and make your own decisions. The evaluation from Dr. Phillips clearly shows you're of sound mind and fully competent. You may wish to consider additional protective measures for your assets, given the demonstrated willingness of family members to attempt to access them inappropriately. With a sharp rap of her gavel, it was over. The case was decided. I had won, but it felt like a hollow victory as I watched my children file out of the courtroom, avoiding my gaze. As we gathered our things to leave, Olivia squeezed my hand. You did well, Sandra. Judge Coleman couldn't have been clearer in her support of your rights. But at what cost? I asked, watching the door through which my children had disappeared. I've won my independence, but I may have lost my family. Give it time, she advised. Sometimes people need to hit bottom before they can begin to rebuild. This might be the wake-up call your children needed. I nodded, hoping she was right. As we left the courthouse, I was exhausted but resolute. The legal battle was over, but the harder work of healing, or accepting the permanent fracture of my family, was just beginning. What I didn't realize then was that Judge Coleman's ruling would set in motion a chain of events that would transform all our lives in ways none of us could have predicted. 3 days after the court hearing, I sat in Grace's sunroom, watching butterflies flit among her rose bushes. My own home felt too empty, too haunted by the memory of Matthew's violence and Emma's betrayal. I wasn't hiding, I told myself. Just healing. You should eat something, Grace said, setting a plate of sandwiches on the table between us. You've barely touched food since the hearing. I smiled weakly. I'm not very hungry these days. Grace sat across from me, her expression concerned but determined. Sandra Mason, I've known you for 40 years and I've never seen you give up on anything. Don't start now. I'm not giving up, I protested. I'm just processing. Well, process with a sandwich in your hand, she insisted, pushing the plate closer. You need your strength for whatever comes next. I obediently took a sandwich, more to appease her than from any real appetite. Have you heard anything? I asked, the question that had been burning in me for days. Grace knew exactly what I meant. Since the hearing, there had been complete silence from both my children. No calls, no texts, no attempts at contact of any kind. The restraining order prevented them from approaching me directly, but nothing stopped them from calling or writing if they'd wanted to. Nothing yet, she said gently. But it's only been a few days. They're probably still processing, too. I nodded, trying to ignore the ache in my chest that had nothing to do with my healing ribs. The sandwich tasted like cardboard in my mouth, but I forced myself to take another bite for Grace's sake. I've been thinking about what you revealed in court. Grace said after a moment. About your plans for the money. Why didn't you tell me sooner? I thought we shared everything. I set down the sandwich, guilt washing over me. Grace had been my rock through this entire ordeal, and I had kept such an important part of myself hidden even from her. I'm sorry, I said sincerely. At first it felt too personal, too raw to share. And then, once everything started happening with Emma and Matthew, I was afraid that talking about it would somehow jinx it, like if I spoke my dream aloud it might vanish. Grace reached across the table and squeezed my hand. I understand. And what you're planning? It's beautiful, Sandra. Truly beautiful. Linda would be so proud. The mention of my sister's name brought tears to my eyes. Linda, 5 years younger than me, had been the bright spirit of our family, always laughing, always dreaming big. Until the cancer came and took everything. Her energy, her savings, and finally her life. She suffered so much, I said softly. Not just from the disease, but from the financial strain. Having to sell her house, her car, even our mother's jewelry to pay for treatments that weren't covered by insurance. And in the end, it still wasn't enough. Grace nodded, having witnessed Linda's struggle alongside me. And now you want to help other women avoid that same fate. The Susan Hope Foundation, I confirmed, the name feeling right on my tongue. I had chosen to use Linda's middle name, Susan, feeling it sounded more professional for the foundation. A fund to help low-income women with cancer cover costs that insurance won't. Experimental treatments, childcare during appointments, transportation, even basic living expenses so they don't have to choose between medicine and food. It's a wonderful tribute, Grace said, and so needed in our community. But Sandra, what about your own security? You're giving away most of the money? I shook my head. Not all of it. I'm keeping enough to fix my house, buy a reliable car, and have a safety net for myself. But the majority, yes. It feels right. It feels like what Linda would want. And what about your children? If they had approached you differently, would you have helped them too? The question caught me off guard, forcing me to confront something I hadn't fully acknowledged. Yes, I admitted after a moment. If they had come to me with respect and honesty, if they had been willing to work on the underlying issues rather than just demanding cash, I would have found a way to help them too. But they never gave me the chance. Grace nodded thoughtfully. Maybe they still will, when they've had time to reflect on everything that's happened. Maybe, I agreed, though without much conviction. The chasm that had opened between us seemed too wide to bridge. Our conversation was interrupted by the ringing of Grace's doorbell. She frowned, not expecting visitors, and went to answer it. A moment later, she returned with Olivia Washington, whose serious expression immediately put me on alert. "What's happened?" I asked, setting down my half-eaten sandwich. "Is it the children? Has something else gone wrong?" Olivia sat in the chair Grace offered, placing her briefcase on the table. "I have news, but it's not necessarily bad. I've been in communication with the district attorney's office regarding Matthew's assault on you." My heart sank. "I told you I didn't want to press charges." "I know," Olivia said gently, "and I've respected that. But the DA has decided to move forward anyway, based on the medical evidence and Matthew's own admission in court. They're charging him with domestic assault." "But he's my son," I protested. "Can't I have any say in this?" "In cases of domestic violence, the state often proceeds regardless of the victim's wishes," Olivia explained. "They believe it's in the public interest to discourage such behavior, and they worry that victims may feel pressured not to press charges due to family relationships." I closed my eyes, imagining Matthew being led away in handcuffs. Despite everything, the image was devastating. What will happen to him? "That's actually why I came in person," Olivia said, her tone softening. Matthew has been in contact with the DA's office. He's agreed to plead guilty and enter a rehabilitation program for alcohol and gambling addiction. If he completes it successfully, he may avoid jail time beyond the initial sentence. Relief flooded through me. It wasn't ideal, but it was far better than I had feared. And the others? Emma and Aaron? Emma has agreed to cooperate with the investigation into the conspiracy to declare you incompetent. In exchange for her testimony against Aaron and Morris, she's been offered probation and community service. Community service? I repeated, finding it hard to imagine my corporate-minded daughter doing such work. Specifically, working with seniors at a care facility, Olivia said, a hint of satisfaction in her voice. The judge thought it would be educational for her. Despite everything, I felt a flicker of amusement at the judge's poetic justice. Then another thought struck me. What about Aaron and that lawyer, Morris? They're facing more serious charges, including conspiracy to commit financial elder abuse and attempted exploitation. Morris will likely be disbarred, and Aaron is looking at possible jail time depending on how the case develops. I absorbed this information in silence. Justice was being served, but there was no joy in it for me, only a profound sadness that it had come to this. My family had been shattered, perhaps beyond repair. There's one more thing, Olivia said, reaching into her briefcase. This came to my office for you. It's from Matthew. She handed me a sealed envelope. My name was written on it in Matthew's familiar scrawl, the handwriting I had once helped him practice at our kitchen table when he was struggling in second grade. With trembling fingers, I opened it and began to read. Mom, I don't know if you'll even read this, and I wouldn't blame you if you threw it away without opening it. What I did to you was unforgivable. There's no excuse for putting my hands on you in anger, for hurting you physically and emotionally after all you've done for me my entire life. I'm writing to tell you that I've entered a residential treatment program for alcoholism and gambling addiction. It's a 6-month program, and I've already been here 2 weeks. For the first time in years, my head is starting to clear, and I'm beginning to see the damage I've done to my life, to my relationships, and especially to you. I don't expect forgiveness. I don't deserve it. But I want you to know that I'm trying to change, to become someone better, someone more like the son you raised me to be before I lost my way. The prosecutor says I'll likely serve a year in jail after completing treatment. I'm prepared to accept that consequence. It's fair, and maybe it's what I need to truly understand the seriousness of what I've done. I hope someday, when I've proven through actions rather than just words that I've changed, we might be able to have some kind of relationship again. But that will be entirely your choice, and I'll respect whatever you decide. With deepest regret and love, Matthew. I read the letter twice, tears blurring my vision. It wasn't a magical fix to all that had happened, but it was a start, a recognition of wrongdoing, and a commitment to change. Matthew is in treatment? I asked Olivia, needing confirmation that the letter was genuine. She nodded. Entered voluntarily 2 weeks ago. The prosecutor confirmed it. It's a respected program with a good success rate, if he's truly committed. I folded the letter carefully, tucking it into my pocket. Thank you for bringing this to me. After Olivia left, Grace and I sat in silence for a long time, watching the sunlight shift across the garden as afternoon turned toward evening. The weight on my chest felt slightly lighter, though the path forward remained unclear. What will you do now? Grace finally asked. I took a deep breath, feeling a new resolve forming within me. I'm going to do exactly what I planned to do before all this started. I'm going to fix my house, buy a decent car, and establish the Susan Hope Foundation. My children need to find their own paths right now, and so do I. Grace smiled, the pride in her eyes warming me. Linda would be so proud of you, Sandra, and so am I. The next morning, I called Olivia and asked her to begin the paperwork for establishing the foundation. It was time to transform my sister's suffering into something meaningful, something that might spare other women the impossible choices she had faced in her final years. As I hung up the phone, I felt Linda's presence more strongly than I had in years, as if she were standing just behind me, her hand on my shoulder in silent approval. The road ahead would not be easy, but for the first time in weeks, I was looking forward rather than back. 3 months passed in a whirlwind of activity. With Olivia's help, I established the Susan Hope Foundation as a legitimate nonprofit organization. I hired a small staff, a director with experience in healthcare advocacy, an office manager, and a part-time grant writer, and secured office space in a modest building downtown. My house underwent a transformation as well. The leaky roof was replaced, the bathroom modernized, and the kitchen updated with appliances that actually worked reliably. I purchased a 3-year-old Toyota pickup truck, nothing fancy but dependable enough to give me the independence I'd been lacking for years. Through it all, I heard nothing from Emma. Matthew wrote occasionally from his treatment center, his letters thoughtful and free of expectations. I responded with brief but kind notes, encouraging his recovery while maintaining the emotional distance I still needed. It was a crisp autumn afternoon when Grace and I were sitting on my newly repaired porch, planning the official launch event for the foundation, when a car I didn't recognize pulled into my driveway. The restraining order against Emma had expired a few weeks earlier, but she had made no attempt to contact me. Until now. I recognized her immediately as she stepped out of a modest sedan, not the luxury SUV she had driven before. She looked thinner, her designer clothes replaced by simple jeans and a sweater, her hair pulled back in a practical ponytail instead of the elaborate styles she had favored. Grace squeezed my hand. "Do you want me to stay?" I considered for a moment, then shook my head. "I think this is something I need to handle alone. But don't go far." Grace nodded understandingly and slipped inside, giving Emma a cool nod as they passed each other. Emma approached the porch slowly, her steps hesitant. Up close, I could see dark circles under her eyes and a weariness that hadn't been there before. "Mom," she said softly, stopping at the bottom of the steps. "I know I have no right to be here, but I needed to see you before I start my community service next week." I gestured to the chair beside me. "You can sit if you want to talk." She climbed the steps cautiously, as if afraid I might change my mind, and perched on the edge of the chair, maintaining a respectful distance. "What do you want, Emma?" I asked directly, too emotionally drained for pleasantries. She looked down at her hands, which were no longer perfectly manicured. "I want to ask for your forgiveness, Mom. Not a superficial apology, but a genuine forgiveness from daughter to mother." I said nothing, waiting for her to continue. "These last few months have given me a lot of time to think," she went on, her voice stronger now, "about who I've become, about how I let Aaron's priorities become my priorities, about how I betrayed you, the one person who has always been there for me, no matter what." "And what conclusions have you reached?" I asked, my tone neutral. Emma finally looked up, meeting my eyes directly. "That I lost myself somewhere along the way, that I became someone I don't recognize, someone who would hurt her own mother for money, who would lie in court, who would stand by while her brother physically assaulted you. I'm ashamed, Mom, so deeply ashamed." Her honesty was disarming, but I had learned to be cautious. "Words are easy, Emma. Actions are what count." "I know," she nodded, a tear slipping down her cheek. "That's why I'm not asking you to forgive me right now. I'm just asking that perhaps, with time, you can consider giving me a chance to show you that I can be better, that I am better." I studied her, trying to see beyond the surface to the daughter I had raised. There was a humility in her now that had been absent before, a rawness that seemed genuine. "And Aaron?" I asked. "Are you still with him?" Emma's gaze dropped again. "We're getting divorced. I realized that he was the one who manipulated me to act against you, and I can't be married to someone who made me hurt my own mother." The news surprised me. Emma and Aaron had always presented themselves as the perfect couple, their image carefully curated for social media and family gatherings. "That's a significant decision." "It was necessary," Emma said simply. "Aaron's facing his own legal consequences now. The investigators found evidence that he'd been embezzling from his real estate clients for years. That's why we were always in financial trouble despite his seemingly successful career." "And the children?" I asked, thinking of my grandchildren whom I hadn't seen in months. "They're staying with me." Aaron agreed because he knows his legal troubles put him in a bad position for custody. She hesitated. "They miss you, Mom. They ask about you all the time." The thought of Lily and Jacob wondering why their grandmother had disappeared from their lives made my heart ache. They were innocent in all this. "How will you support them alone?" I asked, genuinely concerned. Emma had worked part-time at best over the years, relying primarily on Aaron's income. "I've taken a full-time job at an office in addition to the community service," she replied. "It's not glamorous, and the pay isn't great, but it's honest work. We've downsized to a small apartment, sold most of our luxury items. It's going to be tight for a while, but I prefer living with financial difficulties than living with the guilt of what I did to you." For the first time since she arrived, I saw a glimpse of the daughter I had known, the practical, determined girl who had worked so hard in school, who had faced challenges head-on before Aaron came into her life. "What are you going to tell the children about all of this?" I asked. "About why their parents are divorcing, why their father is in legal trouble, why they haven't seen me." Emma straightened her shoulders. "I'm going to tell them the truth, in an age-appropriate way, that their mom made very serious mistakes, that she hurt their grandmother, and that she's working very hard to be a better person. I won't lie to them like I've lied to myself for so long." Her answer, more than anything else she had said, gave me hope that real change might be possible. Still, I wasn't ready to simply forget everything that had happened. "I have one condition for considering forgiving you someday," I said after a long moment. "Anything, Mom. I want you to get therapy. Real therapy, not just the court-mandated sessions. I want you to understand how you came to be capable of betraying your own mother, and I want you to make sure it never happens again. Not to me, not to anyone." "I've already started," Emma said, a hint of relief in her voice. "It's part of the terms of my probation, but even if it wasn't mandatory, I would do it. I need to understand how I lost myself so completely." We sat in silence for a while, the autumn breeze rustling the leaves of the old oak tree in my yard. There was still so much between us: hurt, betrayal, broken trust, but also decades of love and shared history that couldn't be erased by even the worst mistakes. "I can't promise you immediate forgiveness, Emma," I finally said. "What happened was too serious for that, but I'm willing to consider a new beginning, one step at a time." Emma nodded, tears flowing freely now. "That's more than I deserve, and all I can ask for." As she rose to leave, she hesitated, then reached into her purse and pulled out a small, flat package wrapped in simple brown paper. "This is for you. I found it when I was packing up the house. It's not much, but I thought you might want it." I unwrapped it carefully to find a framed photograph I hadn't seen in years. Linda and me at the lake the summer before her diagnosis, our arms around each other, laughing at some forgotten joke, our faces alight with joy and sisterly love. "Where did you find this?" I asked, my voice thick with emotion. It was in Dad's old fishing tackle box in the garage, Emma explained. I remembered how much that day meant to you both, and I thought it might be important for the foundation. The fact that she remembered the significance of that day, that she had thought to save this particular photo from the chaos of her dissolving marriage and moving, touched something deep within me. It was a small gesture, but a meaningful one. Thank you, I said sincerely. This means a lot to me. After Emma left, Grace came back out to the porch, settling beside me with a questioning look. She seems different, she observed cautiously. She does, I agreed, still looking at the photograph. Time will tell if it's genuine and lasting, but I want to believe it is. The foundation opening is next week, Grace reminded me. Will you invite her? I considered the question carefully. Not yet. It's too soon, but maybe someday, one step at a time. That night, as I placed Linda's photograph on my bedside table, I felt a sense of cautious hope. My family had been broken in ways I never could have imagined, but perhaps with time and genuine effort, some form of healing was possible. Not a return to what was, that would never happen, but something new, built on honesty, respect, and the hard lessons we had all learned through this painful journey. The Susan Hope Foundation celebrated its first anniversary with a small gathering at the local community center. In just 12 months, we had helped 57 women with their cancer treatments, providing financial support that made the difference between receiving care and going without. I stood at the podium, looking out at the faces of donors, volunteers, and most meaningfully, some of the women we had helped who were well enough to attend. At 65, I felt more purposeful than I had in decades. 1 year ago today, we opened our doors with a simple mission, I began, to ensure that no woman in our community would have to choose between life-saving treatment and feeding her children. To make sure no one else would have to sell their home or their cherished possessions just to afford the medication they need to survive. I touched the small locket around my neck that contained a tiny picture of Linda. My sister Susan didn't live to see this day, but her spirit is in everything we do, in every woman we help, in every family that gets to keep their mother, sister, or daughter a little longer because of the care they can now afford. As I continued my speech, I noticed a figure slip quietly into the back of the room. Matthew, looking healthier than I had seen him in years, stood against the wall, his expression a mixture of pride and hesitation. He had been released from jail 2 months earlier, after serving his sentence and completing his rehabilitation program. Our relationship was still healing, still fragile, but he had maintained his sobriety and was working as a volunteer at a local shelter for recovering addicts. Every Sunday he came to my house for dinner, a tradition we had established upon his release. Our conversations were sometimes awkward, sometimes emotional, but always honest in a way they hadn't been for years. To my surprise, Emma was there too, sitting in the last row with Jacob and Lily beside her. She had completed her community service 3 months ago, but had continued volunteering at the senior center on her own time, having discovered an unexpected affinity for the work. She had kept her promise to attend therapy, and slowly, tentatively, we were rebuilding our relationship. She brought the children for occasional visits, supervised at first, then more relaxed as trust gradually returned. It wasn't perfect. There were still moments of tension, still memories that couldn't be erased, but it was progress. After the ceremony, as people mingled and enjoyed refreshments, Matthew approached me cautiously. "Great speech, Mom," he said, his voice sincere. "What you've built here, it's amazing." "Thank you," I replied, still getting used to this new, more thoughtful version of my son. "I'm glad you could come." He nodded, glancing around at the photos of women the foundation had helped that lined the walls. Linda would be proud. I remember how hard it was for her at the end, worrying about money when she should have been focusing on getting well. The fact that he remembered, that he understood the deeper purpose behind the foundation, meant more to me than he could know. "How's the job search going?" I asked, changing the subject to his current challenge. Finding employment with a criminal record was proving difficult, despite his new skills and sobriety. "Actually, I wanted to talk to you about that," he said, a hint of his old enthusiasm breaking through. "I had an idea. The foundation helps women with the financial side of cancer treatment, but there are other needs too. Transportation to appointments, household maintenance, things like that." I nodded, intrigued. "Go on." "What if we started a volunteer program, recovering addicts helping cancer patients? It would give people like me meaningful work while providing practical support to the women you're helping financially." His eyes lit up as he explained his vision. "We could call it Second Chances, for the volunteers getting a second chance at a meaningful life, and for the patients fighting for their second chance at health." The idea struck me as inspired, a way to expand the foundation's impact while also creating opportunities for people struggling to rebuild their lives after addiction. "That's actually a wonderful idea, Matthew," I said, genuinely impressed. "Why don't you put together a proper proposal and we can discuss it at our next board meeting?" His face brightened with surprise and hope. "You'd consider it? Really?" "Of course," I said simply. "It's a good idea, and you're the right person to develop it, given your experience on both sides, as Linda's nephew and as someone in recovery." As Matthew moved away to greet Grace, Emma approached with the children. Lily immediately ran to hug me, while Jacob, now 9 and more reserved, offered a shy smile. "The foundation is doing amazing work, Mom," Emma said, her gaze taking in the crowded room. "I read about that woman you helped last month, the single mother with 3 kids who needed the experimental treatment her insurance wouldn't cover." "Maria," I nodded, remembering the young woman's grateful tears when we had told her we could help. "She's responding well to the treatment. The doctors are optimistic." Emma smiled, a genuine smile without the calculation or hidden agendas that had often characterized our interactions in the past. "I'm proud of you, Mom. What you've created here, the lives you're changing. It's incredible." Her words touched me deeply. After everything we had been through, hearing my daughter express genuine pride in my accomplishments felt like a healing balm on old wounds. "Thank you, Emma. That means a lot to me." As the event wound down and guests began to leave, I found myself standing between my 2 children, both flawed, both still working to redeem themselves, but both genuinely trying to be better people than they had been a year ago. The fractures in our family would always be there, thin lines of scar tissue marking where we had broken and mended. But perhaps those very scars made us stronger in certain ways, more aware of our capacity for both harm and healing, more conscious of the effort required to maintain healthy relationships. As I locked up the community center after the last guest had left, Grace linked her arm through mine. "Well, Sandra Mason," she said with a smile, "when I look at where you were a year ago and where you are now, I'd say you've done more than just survive. You've triumphed." I thought about the foundation's success, about my cautiously healing relationship with my children, about the peaceful satisfaction I felt each morning when I woke in my repaired home and planned my day. "Not triumph," I corrected gently. "Growth. I'm still learning, still finding my way. We all are." Grace nodded, understanding as always. "Then here's to growth, and to whatever comes next on this journey of yours." Whatever came next, I knew I would face it with the strength and dignity I had discovered within myself during the darkest chapter of my life. And that, perhaps, was the most valuable asset of all. The late afternoon sunlight filtered through my kitchen window as I prepared Sunday dinner. Matthew would arrive soon, and Emma was bringing the children later for dessert, our new tradition slowly building bridges between all of us. As I chopped vegetables for the salad, I reflected on everything that had happened since that fateful day when James Wilson had appeared on my porch with his offer to buy the farm. In just 18 months, my life had transformed completely. Not just my financial circumstances, but my sense of purpose, my relationships, even my understanding of myself. The Susan Hope Foundation was thriving, having helped over 70 women in its first year. We had recently received a sizable grant that would allow us to expand our services to neighboring counties. Matthew's Second Chances program had launched 2 months ago and was already making a difference, both for the cancer patients receiving assistance and for the recovering addicts finding purpose through service. Emma had been promoted at her job and was taking night classes to earn an accounting degree. The children were adjusting well to their new, simpler life, perhaps even benefiting from having a mother who was more present and authentic than she had been during her marriage to Aaron. Aaron himself was serving a 3-year sentence for fraud and embezzlement. Franklin Morris had been disbarred and was facing his own legal consequences for his role in the attempted exploitation. Their fates brought me no joy, but I recognized the necessity of accountability for harmful actions. As I set the table, I thought about the lessons this journey had taught me, lessons I hoped to pass on to my grandchildren as they grew. I had learned that it is okay to say no, even to those you love most. That setting boundaries isn't selfish, but necessary for healthy relationships. That age doesn't diminish one's right to autonomy and respect. I had learned the difference between helping and enabling, between supporting growth and subsidizing self-destruction. I had discovered that true love sometimes requires standing firm rather than giving in, even when doing so causes temporary pain. Most importantly, I had learned to value myself as much as I valued others. A lesson that had come late in life, but was perhaps all the more precious for its delayed arrival. The sound of tires on gravel announced Matthew's arrival. I watched through the window as he parked his modest used car, purchased with his first paychecks from the part-time job he had finally secured at the local hardware store. He moved with a confidence I hadn't seen in him for years, his posture straight, his steps purposeful. As he approached the house, carrying a small potted plant as a gift, I was struck by how much he resembled his father, not just in his physical features, but in the quiet dignity that had begun to define him since his recovery. I opened the door before he could knock, welcoming him with a warm embrace that would have been unimaginable a year earlier. "Something smells good," he said, handing me the plant, a cheerful little succulent in a blue ceramic pot. "Pot roast," I replied, setting the plant on the windowsill where it would catch the morning light. "Your father's recipe." Matthew smiled at the mention of John, no longer flinching away from memories as he once had. "He'd be proud of you, Mom, of what you've built, of how you've handled everything." "I think he'd be proud of both of us," I said honestly, "of how far we've come, despite our mistakes." As we moved into the kitchen together, I felt John's presence almost tangibly, not as a ghost or spirit, but as the values and love he had instilled in our family. Values that had been temporarily lost, but were now being rediscovered and honored. I thought back to that morning on my porch when I had been watering my tomato plants, oblivious to the storm that was about to engulf my life. So much had changed since then, so much pain endured, so many difficult truths confronted. But standing in my kitchen, preparing to break bread with my son and later with my daughter and grandchildren, I felt a profound sense of peace. The money from the farm had brought both crisis and opportunity into my life. It had exposed the worst in my children, but ultimately helped catalyze their growth into better versions of themselves. And it had allowed me to create something meaningful from my sister's suffering. A legacy that would outlive me, helping countless women face cancer with dignity and proper care. As Matthew set the table with the careful precision of someone for whom ordinary tasks now held mindful significance, I silently thanked John for the strength he had helped me discover within myself. The strength to stand firm when it would have been easier to give in, the strength to forgive without forgetting, the strength to rebuild what had been broken. "Mom," Matthew's voice drew me from my thoughts. "Are you okay? You looked far away for a moment." I smiled, returning fully to the present moment with its simple joys and ongoing challenges. "I'm fine. Just thinking about journeys, how rarely they take us where we expect to go, but often exactly where we need to be." Matthew nodded, a new wisdom in his eyes that had been hard-earned through his own struggles. "I never thought I'd say this, but I'm grateful for the journey, even the hardest parts. Without hitting bottom, I might never have found my way back to myself, to what really matters." As we sat down to our meal, I felt a quiet satisfaction settle over me. My name is Sandra Mason. I am 65 years old, and I finally learned to value myself as much as I always valued others. The future remained unwritten, with challenges yet to face and growth yet to achieve. But whatever came next, I would meet it with the knowledge that I was stronger than I had ever known. Not despite my age, but because of the wisdom and resilience those years had given me. Some might call it a happy ending, but I preferred to think of it as a meaningful continuation of life, of love, of learning to navigate the complex territory of family with greater awareness and compassion. After all, the greatest asset I possessed was not the money from the farm or even the foundation it had created, but the hard-won understanding that true wealth lies in self-respect, purpose, and the courage to stand firmly in one's own truth, come what may.